My name is Ashley, I'm 26 years old, and I just found out my family left for our annual road trip without me. My sister Stephanie convinced my parents I shouldn't come because she didn't want me around. What they don't know is that while they're having fun at the Grand Canyon, I discovered our family vacation home in Colorado legally belongs to me alone. And I just sold it. Before I get into the whole story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had a sibling who tried to push you out of the family picture. Growing up, my family always prided itself on being close-knit. My dad Robert was an electrical engineer who worked hard but always made time for family activities. My mom Karen stayed home with us kids until we were all in school, then worked part-time as a school librarian. Along with my older sister Stephanie, 28, and younger brother Jason, 23, we seemed like the perfect American family on paper. The cornerstone of our family traditions was our annual summer road trip in our beloved RV that my dad affectionately named the Adventure Machine. Every summer since I was 5, we would pack up the RV and set off to a different destination. We've been to Yellowstone, Mount Rushmore, Niagara Falls, and countless other American landmarks. The planning for these trips was almost as much fun as the trips themselves. Dad would spread maps across our dining room table while Mom would research attractions and accommodations. Stephanie, Jason, and I would each get to choose one activity at our destination that the whole family had to participate in. It was democratic, fair, and created some of my most treasured childhood memories. This year was supposed to be special. After years of suggesting it, I had finally convinced everyone to make the Grand Canyon our destination. I've always been fascinated by its natural beauty and geological significance. I majored in environmental science in college, and seeing the Grand Canyon up close had been a dream of mine since I took my first geology class. When my parents announced at Christmas that they had decided on the Grand Canyon for this year's trip, I nearly cried with excitement. I should have known Stephanie would find a way to ruin it. The rivalry between Stephanie and me wasn't always obvious to outsiders. On the surface, we appeared to get along fine. We shared a room until I was 13 and she was 15, and we had many of the same friends growing up. But beneath that facade of sisterly affection, Stephanie was always competing with me, always finding subtle ways to exclude me or make me feel less important. It started with small things. If I joined a club at school, Stephanie would join the same club and quickly become more popular than me. If I brought home an A on a test, Stephanie would casually mention that she had gotten an A+ on a harder test. If I was praised for anything by our parents, Stephanie would find a way to shift the attention back to herself. As we got older, Stephanie's tactics became more sophisticated. She developed a talent for manipulating situations and people, especially our parents. She would twist my words or actions, making innocent things seem malicious or selfish. She mastered the art of making herself look like the victim while painting me as the aggressor. And somehow, our parents almost always took her side. Despite all this, I kept hoping that as adults, we would move past this childish rivalry. After all, Stephanie had a successful career as a marketing executive, her own apartment in the city, and a long-term boyfriend, Tyler, who everyone thought she would marry soon. I figured she had enough going for her that she wouldn't need to keep putting me down. So when the Grand Canyon trip was confirmed, I threw myself into preparations with genuine enthusiasm. I bought new hiking boots, a special camera for landscape photography, and books about the canyon's history and geology. I researched the best trails for different skill levels, knowing that Mom preferred easier hikes while Dad and Jason always wanted more of a challenge. I even created a special playlist for the drive, filled with songs that had special meaning to our family. I also bought thoughtful gifts for everyone to celebrate the trip. For Dad, a high-end compass with a personal inscription. For Mom, a handcrafted journal where she could document the journey. For Jason, a set of professional-grade binoculars for wildlife spotting. And yes, even for Stephanie, I bought a beautiful turquoise necklace made by Native American artisans, hoping it might help bridge the gap between us. During our family dinner 2 weeks before the scheduled departure, I noticed Mom seemed uncomfortable whenever I brought up the trip. She would quickly change the subject or suddenly remember something she needed to do in the kitchen. Dad became unusually focused on his food, and Jason wouldn't meet my eyes. Only Stephanie seemed relaxed, a small smile playing on her lips whenever I mentioned how excited I was about seeing the canyon. I dismissed my concerns, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, what could possibly go wrong with a simple family vacation that we'd been taking in some form for over 20 years? Everyone had agreed to the destination. The RV was in good working order. We all had requested time off from work. Everything was set. I couldn't have been more wrong. About a week before our scheduled departure date, I started to notice something strange. Whenever I would ask about specific details of the trip, what time we were leaving, who was driving the first leg, where our first overnight stop would be, everyone seemed to avoid giving me straight answers. "We'll figure it out," Dad would say vaguely. "I'm sure we'll let everyone know soon," Mom would add, not quite meeting my eyes. Even Jason, who was usually straight with me, would just shrug and say, "Ask Mom and Dad." The first real indication that something was wrong came 3 days before we were supposed to leave. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I overheard Stephanie talking to our parents in the living room. They didn't know I was home. I had returned early from running errands. "It would just be so much easier without her," Stephanie was saying in that persuasive tone she'd perfected over the years. "You know how she always wants everything to go her way on these trips. Remember last year at the lake when she insisted we all go kayaking even though Mom was afraid of tipping over? That was actually a lot of fun," I heard Dad say hesitantly. "And your mom did fine once she got the hang of it." "But that's not the point," Stephanie pressed on. "The point is that Ashley always has to make everything about her. This is supposed to be a relaxing family vacation. Do we really want 2 weeks of her geological lectures and strict hiking schedules?" I stood frozen in the kitchen, unable to believe what I was hearing. Stephanie was actively trying to convince our parents to exclude me from the family trip. And from the lack of immediate objection from my parents, it seemed like she might be succeeding. That night, we had a family dinner that felt like a performance of a play where everyone knew their lines except me. No one mentioned the trip at all, which was strange considering it was just days away and usually a main topic of conversation. The silence on the subject was so obvious that it created a palpable tension around the table. Mom kept refilling water glasses that were already full. Dad talked about work more than he ever had at dinner. Jason was unusually focused on his phone. And Stephanie maintained a pleasant smile throughout, occasionally giving me these looks that I couldn't quite interpret. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "So what time are we leaving on Friday?" I asked directly, putting down my fork and looking around at each family member. "I need to know so I can finish packing and set my alarm." The silence that followed was excruciating. Mom suddenly became very interested in rearranging the food on her plate. Dad cleared his throat several times but didn't speak. Jason looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Only Stephanie maintained eye contact with me, that same inscrutable smile on her face. After what felt like an eternity, Dad finally spoke. "Ashley, honey, we've been meaning to talk to you about that." My stomach dropped. I knew whatever came next wasn't going to be good. "Stephanie feels that maybe you two need some space from each other right now," he continued, his voice strained. "And after talking it over as a family, we thought maybe it would be best if you sat this trip out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sat this trip out? The Grand Canyon trip that I've been looking forward to for months. That I helped plan? "We know you're disappointed," Mom jumped in, her voice high and unnaturally bright. "But we thought you might be too busy with work anyway. Didn't you mention that big project coming up?" I had mentioned a project at work, but it wasn't due until well after we would have returned from the trip. Mom knew that. Everyone knew that. "This isn't about my work schedule," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is about Stephanie not wanting me there. And you're all going along with it." "Don't be dramatic, Ashley," Stephanie said with a sigh, as if I was being unreasonable. "This isn't personal. I just think we could all use a break from the intensity you bring to these trips." "Intensity? You mean enthusiasm?" Excitement about spending time with my family? See what I mean? Stephanie said to our parents, gesturing toward me as if my reaction was proving her point. Everything is always so emotional with her. I looked at each family member in turn, hoping someone would stand up for me. Mom looked guilty but remained silent. Dad kept opening and closing his mouth like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. And Jason just stared at his plate. After dinner, I confronted Stephanie directly in the hallway, away from our parents. "What is your problem?" I demanded. "Why are you doing this?" Stephanie's facade of concerned sister instantly fell away when no one else was around. "Maybe I just want one vacation without having to compete with you for attention," she said, her voice cold. "Is that so hard to understand? Compete with me? You're the one who's always competing. I just want to enjoy time with my family." "Well, this time you'll have to enjoy time by yourself," she said with a shrug. As she turned to walk away, I caught a glimpse of a satisfied smirk on her face. Later that evening, I got a text from Jason, "I'm sorry about dinner. You know I wanted you to come, but Stephanie convinced Mom and Dad it would be less drama without you." I tried to say something, but you know how they are when she gets them on her side. I spent the next day trying to reason with my parents, pointing out how unfair it was to exclude me from a family tradition based on Stephanie's feelings alone. I reminded them how much this particular trip meant to me, how I'd been wanting to see the Grand Canyon for years. I even offered to drive separately and meet them there if Stephanie needed space during the journey. But it was like talking to a wall. My mom kept saying things like, "We need to respect Stephanie's feelings too, and there's always next year." My dad just looked uncomfortable and repeated that the decision had been made. It was already decided. I wasn't going. The morning they left without me was surreal. I sat on my bed in my apartment, staring at my phone as notifications popped up on Instagram and Facebook. First came the obligatory "hitting the road" post from my mom, showing my dad behind the wheel of the RV with the caption "Adventure Machine ready to roll." Then came Jason's photo of their first pit stop, a quirky roadside attraction with giant dinosaur statues. By midday, Stephanie had posted a selfie with my parents at a scenic overlook, all three of them smiling widely with the caption "Family Adventure Day 1. Grand Canyon bound. Family time. Without me." I alternated between crying until I couldn't breathe and sitting in numb silence, staring at the walls of my apartment. I had taken time off work for this trip, so I had nothing to distract me from the constant stream of happy family photos that excluded me. I could have blocked them all on social media, but some masochistic part of me couldn't stop checking for updates, torturing myself with glimpses of the vacation I should have been part of. As I scrolled through years of family photos on my phone, patterns I hadn't fully recognized before became glaringly obvious. There was Stephanie, always positioning herself at the center of family photos while I was often at the edge of the frame. There was Stephanie, always seeming to have private jokes with our parents that I wasn't part of. There was Stephanie, always somehow managing to be the focus of attention at my achievements, standing next to me at my college graduation but somehow drawing everyone's eye with her outfit choice, making my birthday celebrations about her toast to me rather than about me, even finding ways to insert herself into conversations when friends or relatives asked about my job. On the third day after they left, I called my grandmother Laura, my dad's mother and the only family member who had ever seemed to see through Stephanie's manipulations. I was crying so hard she could barely understand me at first. "Ashley, sweetheart, slow down," Grandma Laura said. "Take a deep breath and tell me what happened." Through hiccuping sobs, I explained how I'd been excluded from the family trip, how Stephanie had convinced our parents to leave me behind, how hurt and betrayed I felt. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Ashley," Grandma Laura finally said, her voice unusually serious. "There's something you need to know. Something I've been wanting to tell you for a while now." "What is it?" I asked, wiping my tears. "It's about your grandfather's will. About the vacation property in Colorado. My grandfather had passed away 3 years ago. He and Grandma Laura had owned a beautiful cabin in Aspen, Colorado, that our family had visited many times over the years. It was a gorgeous 3-bedroom property in a prime location, worth around $750,000 in the current market. After Grandpa died, we all assumed the property had been left jointly to my father and his brother, my Uncle Carl, as was the case with most of their parents' assets. What about it? I asked, confused about the sudden change in subject. Your grandfather loved you very much, Ashley, Grandma Laura said. He saw something special in you, your love of nature, your appreciation for the beauty of that mountain property. In his will, he specifically left the Aspen cabin to you alone. I was stunned into silence. But that can't be right, I finally managed to say. We've all been using that cabin. Dad and Uncle Carl have been maintaining it. They've been talking about selling it and splitting the proceeds. I know, Grandma sighed heavily. And that's my fault. I should have been firmer when the will was read. Your father and Carl were so surprised by your grandfather's decision that they essentially ignored that part of the will. They convinced themselves it was a mistake, that your grandfather couldn't have meant to leave such a valuable property to just one grandchild. And you went along with this? I couldn't keep the accusation out of my voice. I was grief-stricken and didn't want more conflict in the family, Grandma admitted. But I've regretted it every day since. The property is legally yours, Ashley. I have all the documentation to prove it. I've been meaning to give it to you for months now, but I kept putting it off, afraid of the family discord it would cause. My mind was reeling. The vacation home, the beautiful mountain cabin where I'd spent so many happy summers, was actually mine? And my family had been keeping this information from me for 3 years? I'm sending you all the paperwork by express mail today, Grandma Laura continued. The deed is in your name. The will explicitly states that the property is yours alone, not to be divided among family members. Your grandfather even left a letter explaining his decision. The documents arrived the next day. With shaking hands, I spread them out on my kitchen table. There it was in black and white, the deed to the Aspen property with my name on it, the relevant section of my grandfather's will highlighting the bequest to me specifically, and a sealed letter addressed to me in my grandfather's handwriting. The letter brought fresh tears to my eyes. My grandfather wrote about how he'd noticed my special connection to the natural world from the time I was a little girl. How I was the only grandchild who would sit with him on the deck for hours, watching the birds and identifying the wildflowers. How he believed I would be the best steward of the property, ensuring it was respected and preserved rather than just seen as a financial asset. He expressed hope that I would share the joy of the cabin with the family while maintaining final say over its use and future. Along with these documents, Grandma had included copies of emails between my parents and Uncle Carl discussing plans to sell the property this summer. They were planning to list it with a real estate agent as soon as they returned from the Grand Canyon trip. They had already gotten an appraisal and were discussing how to divide the proceeds among themselves. There was also a copy of an email from Stephanie to my parents that made my blood run cold. Once we sell Grandpa's cabin, I can finally put a down payment on the condo I've been eyeing. I'm thinking we should each get a third of the proceeds since Uncle Carl already has a vacation home in Florida. I've attached some listings of properties I'm considering. None of them have enough bedrooms for Ashley to stay with me, which is probably for the best. They were planning to sell my property and use the money to buy Stephanie a condo that I wouldn't be welcome in. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. As I sat there surrounded by these documents, my phone pinged with a new Instagram notification. It was another post from Stephanie, a photo of the Grand Canyon at sunset with my parents and Jason, captioned Day 5 of the best family vacation ever. The next morning, I called my friend Megan, who had just passed the bar exam and was working at a real estate law firm. I needed to know exactly where I stood legally and what my options were. Based on these documents, there's no question, Megan said after reviewing everything I'd sent her. This property belongs to you, Ashley. Your grandfather's will is crystal clear, and the deed has been in your name for 3 years. Your family has been using the property without your explicit permission, and they absolutely cannot sell it without your consent. So what do? I asked, still trying to process the magnitude of the situation. That depends on what outcome you want, Megan replied carefully. If you want to maintain family harmony, you could confront them, establish your ownership, but still allow shared use of the property under your terms. Or what? Or you could exercise your full rights as the owner. You could sell it yourself if you wanted to. They would have no legal recourse. The thought had already crossed my mind, but hearing Megan confirm it as a legitimate option made it suddenly feel real. I could sell the property that my family had been secretly planning to profit from without me. The property that was rightfully mine all along. I need to think about this, I told Megan. After we hung up, I decided to check the real estate listings in Aspen out of curiosity. What I found left me speechless. There it was, my grandfather's cabin, already listed for sale at $895,000. There were professional photos showing the interior of the cabin, including recent renovations I hadn't even known about. The listing described it as a beloved family property reluctantly being sold to divide assets among heirs. It was a lie. A complete and utter lie. I felt something inside me shatter. The family photo prominently displayed on the mantel in one of the listing photos didn't even include me. It was from last Thanksgiving, which I had missed due to a flight cancellation. They had staged my cabin to sell without me and any of the family memories showcased for potential buyers. In a daze, I walked to my bedroom and pulled out a box of old journals from under my bed. I flipped through entries from my teenage years, reading account after account of Stephanie's manipulations, my parents' dismissals of my feelings, the constant feeling of being second best in my own family. Here was an entry from when I was 16, describing how Stephanie had convinced our parents that I had broken an expensive vase when she had actually done it herself. Here was another from when I was 18, detailing how Stephanie had accidentally spilled punch on my prom dress an hour before my date arrived. Page after page of small cruelties and injustices that I had tried to forgive and forget in the name of family harmony. My phone pinged again. This time it was a group text from my mom, just arrived at the Grand Canyon. Wish you could see this amazing view. Maybe next time. Love you. As if I had chosen not to come. As if I had opted out of a trip I had been dreaming about for years. The casual cruelty of it, the rewriting of reality, sent me spiraling. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing become shallow. The room seemed to spin around me as I sank to the floor, clutching my phone, having what I would later recognize as my first full-blown panic attack. For nearly an hour, I sat on my bedroom floor, alternating between hyperventilating and crying, feeling as though I was drowning in the accumulated pain of years of being treated as less than by the people who were supposed to love me most. And then, suddenly, everything became very still and clear. A strange calm washed over me. I looked down at my phone, still open to my mom's text, and realized something profound. I didn't need to keep accepting this treatment. I didn't need to keep hoping my family would finally see me, value me, include me. I had spent 26 years trying to earn the love and respect that should have been freely given. I was done. With steady hands, I picked up my phone and opened my email. I composed a message to the real estate agent listed on the cabin property, attaching scans of the deed and relevant portions of my grandfather's will. I wrote, "Hello, I'm Ashley, last name, the legal owner of the property at, address, in Aspen, Colorado, currently listed with your agency. It appears there has been a misunderstanding, as I have not authorized this listing. I've attached documentation proving my ownership. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss this matter." I pressed send, then took a deep breath. For the first time in days, maybe years, I felt a sense of power. Of control. Of standing up for myself. This was the moment everything changed. I was no longer going to be the family doormat. I was no longer going to accept being excluded, belittled, or manipulated. I was taking control of my life, my property, and my future. And Stephanie had no idea what was coming. The real estate agent, a woman named Diane, called me within an hour of receiving my email. Her voice was professionally apologetic, but I could hear the underlying concern about a potential legal issue. Ms. Last name, I'm so sorry for the confusion, she began. We were contacted by Robert and Karen, last name, who identified themselves as the property owners. They provided what appeared to be ownership documentation, though in retrospect, it must have been the original deed before the property transfer through your grandfather's will. I understand, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. They are my parents, and I believe there was a miscommunication within our family about the ownership status. I've only recently become aware of the situation myself. After reviewing the documentation I had sent, Diane confirmed what I already knew: the property was legally mine, and my parents had no right to list it for sale. What would you like me to do about the current listing? She asked. I took a deep breath. This was my moment of decision, my point of no return. I could tell her to cancel the listing, assert my ownership, and confront my family when they returned from their trip. That would be the reasonable approach, the approach that might preserve some semblance of family relationship. Or I could do what a small, wounded part of me desperately wanted to do: take complete control and sell the property myself, removing this asset that my family, especially Stephanie, had been counting on. I'd like to proceed with selling the property, I heard myself say. But under my authorization, with the proceeds coming to me as the legal owner. There was a brief pause. I understand, Diane said. We'll need to create a new listing agreement with you. The good news is that we've already had significant interest in the property. There's a young couple with 2 children who viewed it yesterday and seemed very enthusiastic. Tell me about them, I said, suddenly curious about who might become the new owners of my grandfather's beloved cabin. The Johnsons. He's a doctor and she's a teacher. They have 2 young daughters, 5 and 7. They've been saving for years for a vacation home where they can create family memories. They particularly loved the hiking trails nearby and the reading nook in the upstairs bedroom. The reading nook had been my favorite spot as a child. I would curl up there with books about nature and wildlife, watching the birds at the feeder my grandfather had installed just outside the window specifically so I could see it. I'd like to hear their offer, I said. Events moved quickly after that. The Johnsons submitted an offer of $875,000, slightly under asking price but with minimal contingencies and a quick closing timeline. After brief negotiations, we settled at $880,000 with a 30-day closing period. The timing worked out perfectly. The sale would be completed just as my family was returning from their Grand Canyon adventure. I signed the paperwork electronically and arranged for a local friend to meet the home inspector and appraisal team at the property. Throughout the process, I maintained complete secrecy. I didn't respond to the occasional "wish you were here" texts from my mom or the Grand Canyon photos my brother sent. I wanted no chance of my plans being discovered before everything was finalized. During those 30 days, I made 2 trips to the cabin to retrieve personal items that were meaningful to me. I took the hand-carved chess set my grandfather had taught me to play on. I took the collection of pressed wildflowers we had created together during my childhood summers. I took my grandmother's quilt from the guest room, the one she had made specifically for my visits. I took photo albums, books that had belonged to my grandfather, and the small watercolor painting of the mountain view that I had done when I was 15, which he had proudly framed and hung in the hallway. I left everything else, the furniture, kitchenware, electronics, and decorative items. I did, however, carefully remove all family photos, storing them in boxes that I shipped to my grandmother's house for safekeeping. I wasn't cruel enough to throw away my family's memories, regardless of how they had treated me. The rest of the cabin's contents I arranged to be donated to a local charity that helped furnish homes for families transitioning from homelessness. The cabin had always represented family to me, and it felt right that its contents would help create homes for others. Throughout this process, I maintained an eerie calm. This wasn't a frenzied revenge plot, it was a deliberate reclaiming of what was rightfully mine, executed with careful consideration. With each step I took, I felt more empowered, more in control of my own life. The closing date was set for July 15th, exactly one day after my family was scheduled to return from their 2-week Grand Canyon trip. As that date approached, I prepared myself mentally for the confrontation to come. I knew it would be explosive. I knew I would be called selfish, greedy, and worse. But for the first time in my life, I was ready to stand my ground without wavering, without being manipulated into feeling guilty for asserting my rights. The wire transfer confirming the sale hit my account at 3:17 p.m. on July 15th. I was officially $880,000 richer, minus closing costs and fees. And my family, who had just posted their home sweet home photo after returning from their trip, had no idea their plans had been completely upended. My phone rang at 8:43 the next morning. I had been expecting it, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the phone, waiting. My mother's name flashed on the screen. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Ashley?" My mother's voice was frantic. "Something terrible has happened. There are strangers in the Aspen cabin. They say they bought it. Your father's on the phone with the police now." My family had driven straight from their Grand Canyon trip to the Aspen property, intending to meet with Diane to finalize details for their sale. Instead, they had found the Johnsons, who had arranged to visit their new vacation home and measure for furniture. "The police won't be able to help," I said calmly. "The Johnsons are the legal owners now." There was a moment of confused silence. "What are you talking about? How do you know their name?" "Because I sold them the property. It was mine to sell." The explosion that followed was exactly what I had anticipated. My mother's shocked exclamations turned to angry accusations. I could hear my father in the background demanding to know what was happening. There was a commotion as the phone apparently changed hands. "Ashley, what the hell have you done?" My father's voice boomed through the speaker. "I sold my property," I replied simply. "The cabin Grandpa left to me in his will. The one you all knew was legally mine but decided to use and plan to sell anyway." "That's ridiculous. That cabin has been in the family for..." "Check the deed, Dad. Check Grandpa's will. It's all there in black and white. The cabin was left to me alone." Grandma Laura finally told me the truth and sent me the documentation. There was a stunned silence, followed by muffled conversation I couldn't make out. I imagined my parents conferring, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. "We need to discuss this as a family," my father finally said, his voice tightly controlled. "We're coming back to town now. We'll meet at our house tonight at 7. I agreed to the meeting, though I was under no illusion about what it would entail. This wasn't going to be a reasonable discussion. This would be an attempt to manipulate me, guilt me, and somehow undo what I had done. But I was prepared. At 7 p.m. sharp, I knocked on the door of my parents' house. My mother answered, her face drawn and tired. She didn't hug me as she normally would. Inside, my father sat rigidly on his recliner. Jason was perched uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. And Stephanie stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed, her expression thunderous. "How could you do this?" Stephanie launched in before I had even taken a seat. "Do you have any idea what you've done? That cabin was going to be our family legacy." "Our family legacy?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the down payment for your new condo? The one that wouldn't have enough bedrooms for me to stay in?" Stephanie's face flushed. "You went through my emails?" "Grandma showed me the emails you all exchanged. Planning to sell my property and divide the money among yourselves." "We are your family," my father interjected. "Of course we would have shared the proceeds with you. Like you shared the information that the cabin was left to me? Like you shared the decision about the Grand Canyon trip?" The bitterness in my voice was unmistakable. "That's completely different," my mother protested. "The trip was just about giving you and Stephanie some space from each other." "No, Mom. The trip was about excluding me because Stephanie didn't want me there. Just like she doesn't want me in any part of her life unless she can make me feel inferior." "That's not true." Stephanie exclaimed, though her eyes shifted away from mine. You're always so dramatic, always playing the victim. I'm done being your victim, Stephanie. I'm done letting you manipulate our parents into choosing you over me, again and again. We've never chosen one of you over the other, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really, Dad? What do you call leaving me out of the family vacation? What do you call allowing Stephanie to list and sell my property without my knowledge? We thought it was a family decision, he muttered. It wasn't. And you knew it wasn't. You all knew the cabin was left to me specifically, but you chose to ignore that because it didn't fit what you wanted. Jason, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. She's right. We all saw the will. We all just went along with pretending it was a family asset because it was easier than acknowledging Grandpa chose Ashley. Shut up, Jason, Stephanie snapped. You're not helping. I'm not trying to help you, Jason retorted, surprising me with his firmness. I'm trying to be honest for once. We've been treating Ashley unfairly for years, and this is the result. My parents looked stunned at Jason's defection. Stephanie's face twisted with fury. So that's it, she spat. You sell our family cabin out from under us and expect us to just accept it? I was counting on that money, Ashley. I had plans. Plans that involved stealing from me, I pointed out. The cabin was mine. The decision was mine. And after being excluded from the family trip that I helped plan, that I took time off work for, that I was looking forward to for months, I decided I was done being the family doormat. We can fight this, my father said, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. We can get lawyers involved. From my bag, I pulled out copies of all the documentation, the deed, the will, the letter from my grandfather, the sale paperwork. I laid them out on the coffee table. You can try, I said. But you'll lose. Everything was done legally. The cabin was mine, and now it belongs to a lovely family with 2 young daughters who will create the kind of happy memories there that Grandpa wanted. What about the money? My mother asked quietly. What have you done with it? That's no longer your concern, I replied. But I will tell you that I've donated a significant portion to the National Park Conservation Association in Grandpa's name. He would have liked that. This was true. I had donated $100,000 to the organization my grandfather had supported during his lifetime. The rest of the money was safely in my accounts, some invested for my future, some set aside for further education I'd been wanting to pursue, and some reserved for traveling to places I'd always wanted to see, including, ironically, a solo trip to the Grand Canyon. You've destroyed this family, Stephanie said, tears of rage filling her eyes. Are you happy now? I didn't destroy anything, Stephanie. I just stopped allowing myself to be erased from it. I stood up and gathered my belongings. I think we all need time to process this. I'm going home now. Ashley, wait, my mother called as I reached the door. Can't we talk about this more? Find some compromise? There's nothing to compromise on, Mom. The sale is final. But if you want to talk about our relationship going forward, about how we treat each other as family members, I'm open to that conversation. When you're ready. As I walked to my car, I heard the front door open behind me. It was Jason, jogging to catch up. That was intense, he said, showing me a small, wry smile. But I'm proud of you, sis. You are? Yeah. It was past time someone stood up to Stephanie. And to Mom and Dad, honestly. He shuffled his feet. I'm sorry I didn't do more to stop them from excluding you from the trip. I should have refused to go too. It's okay, Jason. We've all played our roles in this family drama for too long. For what it's worth, I missed you on the trip. It wasn't the same without your geological fun facts and dorky excitement at all the landmarks. I laughed despite myself. Thanks. I think. Can we still hang out sometimes? Just us? I'd like that, I said, genuinely meaning it. Jason had always been caught in the middle of the Stephanie-Ashley dynamic, and I didn't blame him for usually taking the path of least resistance. As I drove home that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. There was pain, yes. There was grief for the family relationships that might never be fully repaired. But there was also a profound sense of liberation, of finally standing up for myself and refusing to accept less than I deserved. The fallout would continue for months. Extended family members would hear conflicting versions of what happened. Some would take my parents' side, viewing me as the ungrateful daughter who sold a family property out of spite. Others, particularly those who had witnessed Stephanie's behavior over the years, would quietly express support for my actions. My parents' initial anger eventually gave way to a more complicated mix of emotions. My father, after reviewing all the documentation with his lawyer and accepting that I had been completely within my legal rights, made halting attempts to rebuild our relationship. My mother fluctuated between guilt, resentment, and genuine regret about how things had played out. Stephanie, predictably, refused to speak to me at all. The narrative she crafted for herself, and anyone who would listen, was that I had vindicatively stolen her future security out from under her. In her version, she was the victim, not the instigator. Some things never change. But I was changing. Day by day, I was becoming stronger, more confident, more willing to set and maintain boundaries. The young woman who would have done anything to avoid family conflict, who would have sacrificed her own wants and needs to keep the peace, was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and refused to be made small to accommodate others' egos. It wasn't the family story I would have chosen to write. But it was one I could live with. 6 months after the cabin sale, my apartment had become a reflection of my evolving identity. In my living room sat my grandfather's chest set on a small table by the window. The pressed wildflower collection hung in delicate frames along the hallway. The mountain watercolor I had painted as a teenager held pride of place above my desk. These objects, saved from the cabin, represented not just memories of my grandfather but reminders of my own worth, of being valued for exactly who I was. My relationship with Jason had strengthened in ways I hadn't anticipated. Free from the poisonous dynamic that Stephanie created whenever we were all together, Jason and I discovered we actually enjoyed each other's company. We started a tradition of monthly hiking trips, exploring local trails and talking about everything from his graduate studies to my new career aspirations. Sometimes, in quiet moments on these hikes, he would share insights from his own therapy journey, processing the complicated family dynamics we had both grown up with. You know what my therapist said, he told me one crisp October morning as we rested on a boulder overlooking a valley of autumn foliage. She said our family operated with Stephanie as the sun that everyone else orbited around. Her needs, her feelings, her wants always came first, and we all just adjusted our behaviors accordingly. That's exactly it, I agreed, watching my breath form small clouds in the cool air. And any time I tried to exist outside that orbit, I was pulled back in or pushed away entirely. Well, you broke out of the orbit for good, Jason said, bumping my shoulder with his. Blasted right out of the solar system. I laughed. That's one way of putting it. The extended family dynamics had been a mixed bag, as expected. Uncle Carl, after getting over his initial shock that the cabin wasn't partly his to sell, actually expressed admiration for my standing up for myself. You're more like your grandfather than anyone gives you credit for, he told me during a phone call. He never let anyone push him around either. My grandmother Laura had become an unexpected ally and confidant. Released from the burden of keeping secrets, she shared more stories about my grandfather, about his own complicated family relationships, about how he had always seen something special in me. He would be proud of you, she assured me. Not necessarily of all the drama, but of you knowing your own worth and not letting anyone diminish it. Some cousins and aunts took Stephanie's side, of course, echoing her narrative of my selfishness and betrayal. I learned to let those judgments wash over me without absorbing them. People who hadn't lived my experience, who hadn't felt the constant undercurrent of being less than in my own family, couldn't possibly understand my actions fully. And that was okay. I used a portion of the cabin proceeds to enroll in a master's program in environmental conservation, something I had always wanted to pursue but had put off due to financial constraints. My studies energized me, connecting me to a community of like-minded individuals passionate about protecting natural spaces like my grandfather had been. And true to my word, I took myself to the Grand Canyon the following spring. Standing alone at the south rim, watching the sun set over the vast, ancient landscape, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The family trip I had been excluded from had become irrelevant. This moment, this experience, was entirely my own, not filtered through family dynamics or diminished by Stephanie's needs taking precedence. I took a selfie against the stunning backdrop and posted it without any elaborate caption, just the date and location. No performative family hashtags, no carefully curated image of perfect relationships. Just me, living my life authentically. My parents and I had begun the slow, careful process of rebuilding our relationship on new terms. After the initial explosion and months of minimal contact, my father had reached out first, asking if we could meet for coffee. That first conversation was strained and halting, filled with long silences and careful phrasing. "I'm not going to say I understand or agree with everything you did," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "But I've been doing a lot of thinking. About patterns. About how we've treated you over the years. And?" I prompted when he fell silent. "And I think we've let you down. Your mother and I both. We took the path of least resistance, giving in to Stephanie's demands because it was easier than dealing with her reactions. That wasn't fair to you." It wasn't a complete apology, but it was a start, an acknowledgement of the dynamic that had shaped my childhood and young adult years. Over subsequent meetings, my father continued his halting attempts to understand my perspective, to recognize the harm that had been done. My mother took longer to come around. Her relationship with Stephanie had always been particularly enmeshed, and breaking those patterns was more difficult for her. But eventually, she too reached out, inviting me to lunch at a neutral restaurant. "I keep thinking about all the times you tried to tell us how you felt," she said during our meal. "All the times we dismissed your feelings or told you that you were overreacting. I never realized how that must have felt for you." "Like I wasn't important enough," I supplied. "Like my feelings didn't matter as much as Stephanie's." Tears filled her eyes. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "I know, Mom. But impact matters more than intent." These conversations weren't easy, and they certainly didn't instantly repair years of damage. But they were necessary first steps. I maintained firm boundaries throughout. I would not attend family gatherings if Stephanie was using them as opportunities to vilify me. I would not pretend everything was fine for the sake of appearances. I would not minimize my experiences to make others more comfortable. Stephanie herself remained entrenched in her position as the wronged party. She had eventually secured a loan for her condo down payment, telling everyone who would listen that she had to go into debt because of my selfish actions. When we unavoidably crossed paths at Jason's graduation ceremony, she made a show of ignoring me completely, as if I were invisible. "You know what's ironic?" Jason said afterward. "She's doing to you exactly what you always felt she did, trying to make you disappear. But now, you don't need her acknowledgement anymore." He was right. Stephanie's approval or recognition no longer held any power over me. The realization was liberating. As the one-year anniversary of my cabin sale approached, I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the sunset and reflecting on everything that had changed. The money from the sale had secured my financial future in ways I never could have imagined. More importantly, standing up for myself had transformed my sense of self-worth and my understanding of what I deserved from relationships. I had lost a certain kind of family, the kind that required my diminishment to function. But I had gained something far more valuable, myself, whole and uncompromised. Sometimes finding your true family means losing the one you were born into. Sometimes healing means walking away from people who cannot see your worth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand alone rather than accept conditional love. The painful irony of being excluded from that family trip was that it ultimately led to my greatest freedom. By trying to push me further to the margins of our family, Stephanie had inadvertently pushed me toward my own strength, my own power, my own path. I took out my phone and composed a message to my followers, the online community that had grown as I shared glimpses of my journey over the past year. 1 year ago today, I made one of the hardest decisions of my life. I chose myself over the familiar patterns that were slowly suffocating me. It hasn't been an easy road, but I wouldn't trade the person I've become for anything. If you're facing your own difficult choices between peace and authenticity, between acceptance and self-respect, know that you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by those who can't see it. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice for your own well-being? Have you had to stand up to family members who didn't respect your boundaries? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others find their own courage. And if this revenge story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Your support means more than you know.